Eric and I have been to a lot of weddings in the last year. Some big, some small. We're pretty close to all of the couples, and as you might imagine, with Eric having event planning as part of his wheelhouse, we've had particular insights into reception planning, especially the seating arrangements. I swear, I don't think anything gets a couple as wound up, or the guests for that matter, as where everyone's going to be seated. Whether justified or not, people see it as a referendum on their value to the couple. Not only that, it offers a sense of their status to the other guests. I can't really tell you who sat where at our wedding, except for this one guest who, though she sat at a table with some of her very best friends, thought that table was just a little too far from the groom's table, and to this day remains highly offended. It seems that people defining themselves and their value based on where they are in relation to others has always been a thing. I guess at the end of the day, human nature is to define ourselves by who we can determine we are more important than or have power over. Like so many things about human nature, Jesus understood this keenly. Today, Luke gives us what on the surface sounds like a lesson in etiquette. When you arrive at a wedding, sit here, not there. When you're planning a party, invite this group, not that group. I would venture a guess to say that for most of us, at first hearing, there's nothing really revelatory about this passage, but simply a reminder not to be too proud and to remember those who are less fortunate. That's nice, but it's not very powerful and certainly not game-changing. And let's face it, Jesus is a game changer, so there's got to be more to it. In the opening of the passage, we're told that Jesus has gone on the Sabbath to the home of a leader of the Pharisees. This is no casual invitation. All eyes are on Jesus, what he says, what he does, and they're plotting. But Jesus is watching them closely too. He stands back and takes the scene in, watching them, this gathering of very important people, jockeying for the best seat at the table. What Jesus offers in response to this scene, as it so often does, takes the social practice of the day and flips it right around. When you go to a banquet, don't seek out the best seat, leave it for someone else who's more important. It's safe to assume here that Jesus is talking about more than manners. But what exactly? I think the answer to that question is in some way found in part of the story that we didn't hear today. As Jesus makes his way to this house, he finds himself, just as in last week's gospel, faced with yet another person who is suffering, someone who is afflicted with disease, someone whom those who were watching him would have seen as being punished by God. Jesus asks the Pharisees here also if it's appropriate to heal on the Sabbath, and they offer no response. His compassion compels him to break from the conventional practice of the day, and he heals the man, consistently modeling God's unconditional love for all people at all times. Immediately after, he questions them again, asking if they would let someone that they cared about suffer on the Sabbath, and again they remain silent. It's unclear whether this is out of protest or out of shame. Either way, there's no rebuke of Jesus' actions, and since we know that by this point they're actively building their case against him, this is just more fuel for the fire. Then Jesus turns his attention to his host, suggesting that when inviting people to his home, rather than inviting those just like himself, those he knows, those he's pretty sure will return the favor, he should invite those people who are the outcasts, those like the man who'd just been healed, holding no hope of them returning his hospitality. It's wildly scandalous because he's saying this right in front of the very people that the host has invited. What did they think about that? What do we think about it? Jesus says, take the lowest place so that your host will move you higher. I have to be honest and say that I struggle with this because it sounds pretty manipulative to me. Every time I hear it, I find myself asking if Jesus is trying to tell us to fake people out, to use reverse psychology or the facade of humility so we get what we want or what we think we deserve in the end. I don't believe that to be true, so what are we supposed to do with that? I think it depends on who we relate to in the story. If we try to relate to Jesus standing back and watching, it's too easy to give ourselves a free pass, to sit back and judge without acknowledging our own complicity with systems that are designed to hold people down. I suggest that we have to try to see ourselves as those dinner guests and take a hard look at what Jesus is really saying here. It's clear that Jesus was asking them to make a conscious decision not to place themselves above others. In a society with strict codes about who's in and who's out, this would have been revolutionary. It stood in the face of everything they thought they understood. He was telling them to give up their positions for the benefit of those people, the ones who were deemed unclean, unfit, and unworthy by the standards of the day. Jesus is asking us to do the same thing, and it's still pretty revolutionary, especially in a culture where we put so much emphasis on looking out for number one. I've been thinking a lot about this in the aftermath of the shooting this week in Minneapolis. I find it impossible to stand here today and not talk about it. More lives lost, more people traumatized, more finger pointing. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey reminded us that in addition to our prayers, the moment demands action when he said after the shooting, don't just say this is about thoughts and prayers right now. These kids were literally praying. They should be able to go to school or church in peace without the fear or risk of violence. And their parents should have the same kind of assurance. And he's right. We have a gun problem in this country. We can debate all day long about all of the other things that lead to these tragedies. But the fact remains that the proliferation of guns in our country and the relative ease with which it seems people can access them seems to be a particular problem here in the United States. I'm not saying that if we just get rid of all the guns, bad things won't happen. I'm not that naive. We have a culture that celebrates violence. We see it in movies, in television, in video games. We seem to revere warfare and aggression as symbols of might and strength. These things shape how we see the world and desensitize us to actual human tragedy and suffering. I believe these situations are about mental health, about our societal mores, and gun access in equal measure. In addition to making sure that everyone has access to mental health care and actually dealing with our obsession with violence, we should be doing everything we can to make guns less accessible. And no, I don't believe that arming teachers is an effective solution to the problem. I was curious to know how many school shootings there were just this year alone. You want to know what I found out? That's harder to clarify than you would think, because people can't agree on how to account for the data. Do you only count the data where there was loss of life or injury? Do you only count it if the shooter was a student? Do you only count, or do you count every instance of a firearm being illegally discharged on school property? I wonder if that all disturbs you as much as it disturbs me. Here's what I learned from consulting a variety of databases and news outlets. There have been anywhere from 45 to over 150 school shootings this year as of the end of last week. Where does it end? When do we say enough? Why have we not said enough yet? Orange is the color that's used to bring attention to our need to end gun violence. I don't want to have a reason to ever wear this stole again. I've said that before. This isn't about demonizing people who legally own guns. And it isn't about someone's constitutional right to have a gun. It's about people. It's about children living safely. Yet I literally keep hearing people talk about their God-given right to own a gun as a reason to oppose stricter gun control laws. To be clear, supporting strict gun control laws doesn't mean taking guns away from people who are stable, law-abiding citizens who are properly vetted and certified and trained on the use of a firearm. But let me say this. Nobody has a God-given right to own a gun. What we all do have is a God-given right to live and to thrive in safety and peace. What is it going to take before we actually take action? Before we actually do the hard thing that's not actually that hard, because we have ample global evidence to prove that it's not. Before we stop putting what we want in front of what our children need from us. Our schools shouldn't be fortresses. They should be palaces for learning and creativity. If there are things we can do to give vulnerable people a better chance, why aren't we doing them? What are we afraid of giving up? If we have the opportunity to end the suffering of someone else, why would we ever choose not to? If we have the opportunity to prevent the suffering of someone else, why are we not doing everything we can to make that happen? Jesus asks us to serve the needs of the least of us as if they were the greatest, knowing that it's through sincere humility and compassion in our hearts that we find the path to true righteousness and salvation. That is how we realize the realm of heaven here on earth. At this moment, that looks like restricting access to guns. But it's also about providing access. Access to food and housing and health care and education and employment. We are the richest country in the world. And lately, it seems that more and more folks are trying to define us as a Christian nation. Okay, for a moment, let's go with that. If that's the case, then why are our children dying? And why are people starving and living on the streets? I believe we have to contend with that. I believe Jesus is asking us to contend with that. He's asking us to look at the places and spaces of our lives where we put our own wants and desires in front of the needs and struggles of others and seek a different path. We must do all that we can to serve a world that more and more cries out in distress. We must risk some of our own comfort in order to show up for those in need, those who suffer, and especially for those who cannot do it themselves, like our children. When we come to the table today, I pray that we will be reminded of the unconditional love that God has for all of us. That it's God's desire that every one of us have the opportunity to grow and thrive in this world, and that we leave here today with a renewed commitment to doing all that we can to make that possible. We don't know what angels we may serve and what lives may be saved along the way. Amen.